my name is Claire Bian, and I am co-chair of this conference with Phil Corlett, who's standing at the front. And we are very excited about this conference with the theme of citizenship. So I'm really excited about this conference. When Jessica Aranella approached me at the ISPS International Conference in Liverpool in August of 2017 and said, so we're thinking about a conference in Connecticut, and I just talked with Ken Blatt, and he's too busy because he as chairman of the board of Advocacy Unlimited here in Connecticut, he organizes a conference. So she said, what about New Haven? So I said, oh, that's great. I can talk with Larry Davidson. We arranged a telephone conference, and after the conference, she asked if I would consider chairing this meeting, the Program Planning Committee, and I thought it would be a wonderful opportunity to introduce the amazing work of the Yale Program for Recovery and Community Health and the citizenship framework, which I found in a pre-conference workshop in Liverpool with Dr. Jim Van Oos, that so much of what he was saying in that pre-conference workshop was extremely resonant from my understanding with the citizenship model. And then when I saw the theme of the Rotterdam conference, which was this past August, which was Stranger in the City, the circular relationship between alienation and psychosis and the healing power of human reconnection. And alienation is an enormous part of the conditions that lead to the vast array of mental health conditions, serious mental health conditions, including psychosis, and whether it be alienation from other due to abuse or trauma, or alienation from self, because we don't quite understand who we are in this world. That lack of understanding makes it very difficult for us to live as most people live their lives. So in order to get things moving, I'm not going to reread the call for proposals and our goals for the conference, but I do wish to introduce those members of the planning committee who are here in the audience, and they're Phil Corlett, Ken Blatt, Marie Brown, who unfortunately can't be here today, Anna Florence, who will be presenting, Rebecca Miller, Judy Murray, Anthony Pavlo, Cindy Peterson-Dana, Albert Powers, Graciela Reese, and Graciela, if you are in the room, if you could raise your hand, Lauren Utter, and Pat Wright. I just saw that, there you are. So now I would like to introduce Phil Corlett, the co-chair of the Planning Committee, who is going to introduce the Citizenship Plenary. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire, and thank you all for being here. It's been a real honor and a pleasure to be involved in the organization of this meeting. Especially as someone who comes as a sort of relative outsider. So I'm a cognitive neuroscientist, so not somebody who typically you might find at a meeting like this. And what that means is that I study the brain to try and figure out how the mind works, which may be something quite troubling to at least some of you in the audience. But over the years, in my interactions with the folks from Perch and with Claire, I've learned that there are many different ways of explaining and understanding and approaching the phenomena that we all care about. And I'm sort of motivated and inspired to think about how we can bridge different levels of explanation. So to go from the really basic reductionist biology all the way through to what we're going to hear about shortly, political and social and citizenship-driven ways of understanding psychosis and also perhaps helping people feel better. And it would be remiss of me not to mention my dearly departed mentor, Ralph Hoffman, who really instilled in me that sort of bridging between levels of understanding is really possible and something that we should all be striving for. Ralph pioneered transcranial magnetic stimulation to treat intractable auditory verbal hallucinations, but he was a master clinician and he was a really good listener. And he really understood that to treat psychosis, to help psychosis, you really need to think about the person and the person in a social context. And I think the work we're going to hear about from Perch this morning really gives us a framework for thinking about that very clearly, and also for making some interventions and hopefully changing and improving things. I'm not going to spend too much time, but I just want to emphasize that over the past year or so, I've been able to work much more closely with the folks from Perch, and whilst they make a citizenship intervention to help serious mental illnesses, I think they've made me feel more like a citizen here at Yale, and I'm really grateful for their collaboration. So without further ado, I'd love to invite them up and open up the meeting. Thanks.
Good morning. Thank you, Phil, for that very nice introduction. It's been a pleasure for me to work with you and Elle Powers and Sarah Feinberg over the past year, opening my mind to new ways of looking at citizenship and this work that we do in the Yale Department of Psychiatry. I'm Michael Rowe. I'm the co-director of the Yale Program for Recovery and Community Health, or PERCH, and director of the Citizens Community Collaborative, or the CCC. And I'm happy to be here with my CCC colleagues. Each of them has done amazing work over the past few years to expand the citizenship work that we're doing. I want to thank a few other people as well. Larry Davidson for his longtime support for and involvement with this work. Sherelle Bellamy and Pauline Bernard, and all of the other members of the CCC. Claire Bien, who advocated for citizenship's inclusion in this conference, and the folk at the Connecticut Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, who have been funding various citizenship programs for the past 19 years and for their involving us in their recovery policies and programs. My job this morning is to introduce to you the concept of citizenship as we understand it at PERCH and the CCC, and my colleagues will then be talking about the actual work that we do with citizenship. And I will give you a definition of citizenship in a few minutes, but I want to give you a little background first. When Claire Bien, and I meant to add thanks to, did I say Claire Bien for bringing citizenship to this conference? And when Claire talked with me about presenting on citizenship here, one thought that I had was, well, of course, citizenship is citizenship. There's no psychiatric citizenship or any other kind of qualified citizenship. There's either citizenship or there isn't. So yes, citizenship and ISPS, that makes sense to me. Another thought that I had was, okay, but what about people who have been involved with this citizenship work over the past 20 years, who've had experience of psychosis, hearing voices, hallucinations, other experiences? What about that connection? And my memory took me back quite a few years to 1994, and a man named Jim was a client of the homeless outreach team of the Connecticut Mental Health Center, of which I was the director from 1994 to 2000. That's director of the outreach team, not of the Connecticut Mental Health Center. He was a client of the homeless outreach team and was homeless on the streets of New Haven when the outreach workers made contact with him and helped him get into housing. He had a hard time in his apartment. One problem he had was that the TV was talking to him, and not talking to him in the way that the newscaster talks to all of us, but talking to him specifically. And so he turned off the television, and the television was still talking to him. And so he unplugged the television, and the television was still talking to him. And this was one of the reasons that decided him, after a couple of weeks of apartment living, that he would go decide that he would go out and live on the streets again. Now, This vignette is true as far as it goes, but it doesn't go far enough, and thus it's false. For the person who is not well informed about the capacities of people with psychiatric challenges, it's too easy to say, well, hearing a vignette like this, well, what did you expect? Someone who's hearing voices is going to be able to make it in their own apartment and survive in their own place. For the person who's familiar with recovery, that person hearing this vignette would probably say things like, well, what about the rest of his life? What about the fact that he was surviving homelessness out on the street? What about the fact that being a survivor of homelessness gave him a certain status out on the streets? Shouldn't that be part of the story? So let me tell you a little bit more about Jim. Jim grew up in rural Pennsylvania as part of a large family and extended family. He was kicked out of both because of an inappropriate relationship with a younger female cousin. Joined the Army, got an honorable discharge, began wandering the East Coast, taking menial jobs, losing them because of his drinking and odd behavior. Came to Connecticut. He reconnected with his sister in Meriden, stayed with her for a month until she asked him to leave because of his drinking and his odd behavior. And he came to New Haven and had lived on the streets for about a year when the outreach workers met him. He refused their help except for coffee and sandwich and things like that for a while. But Ron, a peer outreach worker, developed a relationship with Jim, and over time, Jim, with Ron's help, applied for SSI and got it. He saw the team psychiatrist a few times, and finally, after refusing for a year to even consider housing, he agreed to move into his own rent-subsidized apartment. And it was a pretty nice place. It wasn't just the TV that bothered Jim. He didn't know how to cook for himself. He was lonely, isolated. Maybe isolation had something to do with the voices he was hearing, as researchers like Dr. Ralph Hoffman, whom Dr. Corlett mentioned, have suggested. People in his apartment building looked at him funny. He stood out, and not in a good way. And finally, he'd just had enough. Now, what you've just heard is an abbreviated form of the foundational story of citizenship. Jim taught us that people who couldn't be reached, according to the prevailing wisdom of the time, could be reached. He taught us that outreach teams and integrated systems of care can provide a wide range of services, even to the so-called hardest to reach folk. And he taught us that as good as these services could be at their best, they weren't enough. Jim taught us that homeless outreach teams and integrated systems of care could not offer him access to an identity that was more meaningful to him than the one he had as a survivor of homelessness. They could offer him program citizenship in the system of care, but that's not citizenship. So now I'll give you our definition of citizenship. We define citizenship as a person's or people's strong connection to the 5 R's of rights, recovery, rights. How many million years have I been saying this? Rights, responsibilities, roles, resources, and relationships that society offers its members in a sense of belonging that's validated by others. So I'll say that again. Citizenship is a strong connection to the rights, responsibilities, roles, resources, and relationships that society offers its members, and a sense of belonging that's validated by others. And now let's go through them one at a time. So the first R is rights. You see here the right to vote, along with other rights such as freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, right to worship as you please. On the right-hand side, this is a painting of the signing of the U.S. Constitution in 1789. And this was the face of citizenship and the face of rights in the United States at the outset. White, male, money, property. So rights are not always available to everyone in the same degree at any given time. Responsibilities. So on the left-hand side, you see one of our responsibilities as citizens is to sit on juries when we're called. Other responsibilities are paying taxes, obeying the law, serving in the military in times of conscription. On the right-hand side, included this photograph of slaves picking cotton. This would be around 1860. And I included here to make the point that responsibilities require freedom or a level of freedom. The slaves that you see here are doing forced labor, right? And I would argue you cannot have, if you are providing forced labor, you cannot have a responsibility to the person who is forcing you to do this thing. You can have responsibility to each other to survive. You can have a responsibility to yourself to try to maintain your sense of self and inner freedom in the face of these very difficult conditions. But you can't have responsibility to a slave master because slavery is illegitimate and criminal. So we can't assume responsibilities in a situation like this. So the third R is roles. On the left-hand side, you see this gentleman, Barack Obama, who occupied the role of President of the United States from 2009 to 2017. And the interesting thing is that he not only occupied the role, but he performed the role incompetently. Which is pretty amazing when you think about where we are today. On the right-hand side, I think this drawing was made around the same time as the signing of the U.S. Constitution, and it depicts this woman. She's well-dressed, got a book. There's a good chance that she was a citizen. But she was a citizen. If she was a citizen, she was a citizen through her father or her husband, not on her own recognizance. She couldn't vote. And the roles that were available to her were severely prescribed. There's a fourth R of resources. On the left-hand side, you see sort of the typical resources of this family that has a car and has a house. Then they may own both. They may be paying for them, but they have these resources at their command. On the right-hand side, this is a painting of Tecumseh, Shawnee chieftain. Tecumseh cannot, of course, represent all Native Americans, but he can represent the fact that resources can be stolen. And the fifth R is relationships. On the left-hand side, this looks like a family. These are important relationships, critical relationships. On the right-hand side, this is Grand Central Station, and there are relationships here too. There are connections of play and power and work and social networks. And we know from our experiences of traveling, things like this, that relationships in such situations can be quite impersonal at times. So those are the 5 R's. and a sense of belonging that is validated by others. On the left-hand side, that's a wordle, so that a group of people was asked, what comes to your mind when you think of belonging? And some of the words that came up were being a part of things, family, friends, acceptance, fitting in, inclusion. On the right-hand side, this is a different kind of belonging. This photo, courtesy of Billy Bromage, our community organizer, was taken in 1970. This is a protest during the trial of Bobby Seale and Erica Huggins of the Black Panthers. The sense of belonging here is a working together against a racist system. The validation that people probably felt came from themselves and their work and the cause that they espoused, also possibly from the non-validation that they were getting from the folks that they were trying to, and the policies that they were working against. So citizenship is a strong connection to the 5 R's of rights, responsibilities, roles, resources, and relationships, and a sense of belonging that's validated by others. Recovering citizenship, as Larry Davidson says, is a social movement. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Wow. I hate podiums. I like being close to the audience, quite frankly. I mind if I take this off? Okay. Whew, much better, much better. My name is Patty Benedict, and am I getting too close to the microphone? Okay. And I've been working with citizenship for 20 some odd years. The director of citizenship implementation and education, something like that. What I'm going to talk about today, myself and my colleague, Bridgett Williamson, is about the Citizens Project. This is the actual first project component that came out of all the work that Michael Rowe has done for so very long. The Citizens Project has been around for a lot of years, almost 19 years. It was designed to assist our students with the understanding and exercising of their rights, identifying ways to fulfill their goals and responsibilities, enhancing their roles as valued members of their communities, and enhancing their knowledge and access to the community resources. And also to enhance their ability to develop supportive relationships and networks. And finally, but not least, enhancing their skills to aid in their process of recovery. That's what the program's goals are. And connecting people to their community. So we have a Citizens Project here in New Haven, and that's what's been in existence for 19 years. That Citizens Project that we currently have, that we've been running, basically works with people who are 18 years or older, have residency in the greater New Haven area, also who are in treatment for mental health issues, who have connected to the community justice system in some way, form, or fashion in the last 3 years. That could be parole, probation, arrest, incarceration. And the majority of our students, just by happens, have substance use disorders as well. Now, the only criminal justice charge that we don't accept in this Citizens Project is sexual offenses. So we're held for 2 hours, twice a week, actually down at the Community Soup Kitchen for those of you that know New Haven. It's actually Christ Church that we hold it now in the Undercroft. And they've been kind enough to host us all these years, which is great. We have 4 components to the project. Recovery specialists, always. Actually, people with lived experience were part of the design of this project from day one, which like 20 years ago, that wasn't really what people did, right? We also have What's Up, the classes that address the 5 R's, and the valued role projects. It's a lot of work in 2 hours, huh? But the recovery specialist, that I'd like to be described by Bridgett, who is one of our, not only our recovery specialist, but also the co-director of the Citizens Project right now.
So again, my name is Bridgett Williamson. I am the co-director of the Citizen Project now that Patty done moved on. I basically build relationships with people. I can't get nothing done unless I start a relationship. So that's the first thing I go after is getting to know people, and I want them to get to know me. I also help people, assist them to make small goals, because when they come in, they're kind of broken. So I try to lift them up and give them hope. But one thing I don't do, I cannot save people and I can't fix people. People have to fix themselves. And another thing I don't do, I don't put expectation on others. I only can put it on myself. I am a woman of lived experience with mental health and substance abuse. I have been clean since 1991, the day my mom died, September the 25th. And the reason why I got into this field, because I wanted to try to assist somebody else that was losing loved ones or struggling with opiate use, because I was an opiate user for 13 or 14 straight years, and I want to give back. Once people get clean, for some reason we want to try to save the world. I'm not trying to save the world, but I'm just trying to save some if they give me the chance. And I also meet people where they're at, and as I rise, as I climb, they come right with me. I do not leave them, because I was one of them and still is. The only difference between me is that I'm in a paid position, but I'm still just like the students that I work with.
Thank you, Bridgett. Don't get too comfortable, though. You're doing the next part. What's Up was actually created about 3 or 4 years into the project. And it was really created because the students told us, look, we need some time to talk. We want some time to talk. So we sat down with them and created the structure around this. And if you ask most of our graduates or most of our students what's their favorite part of the program, they'll tell you What's Up. So Bridgett, can you talk about What's Up, please?
Yeah, like Patty said, the students created the What's Up, and that is a powerful hour that we need, because the students are empowering themselves. So just even in my own experience, in our home, we've been badgered a little bit. Oh, you ain't gonna be nothing because my substance abuse, or I didn't finish college. I have 88 credits, so I'm kind of low when I enter into a space that I don't know nothing about. So what am I talking about? So when they come in, we will role model the What's Up, because these are the first time they enter the group. But usually the students, after they see the model, the students start to facilitate, because I think it's important to give people back their power. We go into these agencies and the clinician, and we always listen to what people tell us what to do. Like we always got to take your medication or come to this appointment. But in this space here, we don't tell them what to do. We care about them, and we give them hope and confidence, so they're able to run the What's Up without us being there. The only reason why Pauline and I are there to make sure the structure is being done. Other than that, the What's Up is for the students, not for me. Yeah. I see you out there pulling. Thank you for being here. That's my
Co-director.
co-worker, Rip. Yes.
Yes.
Appreciate you here.
So, the classes are based on the 5 R's. And as you can see here, there's a variety of different classes. This is a small group of them, actually. We have a much wider range of topics. In actuality, a lot of times when we ask students to rate which class in the very beginning, which classes they find the most important or they're most interested in, we also give a space so that people can write in topics as well that maybe we've missed. And some of those students over the years have actually taught those classes. Sometimes we bring outside presenters, sometimes it's been those of us that work for the project, but again, sometimes it's been some of the students as well. Now, out of all these classes, the one class that we don't give people a choice on, simply because they'd never pick it, is exactly what I'm doing right now, public speaking. I'll tell you, that is the most scariest class. Well, it's actually a group of classes for any of us, right? Much less people getting up there, like Bridgett's doing, and talking about themselves, because that's really what they're doing in these public speeches. So they're each given the charge of doing 4 speeches before they graduate from our program. The first speech is, who are you and how did you come to this program? And whatever you're comfortable sharing, okay? Second speech is community. What does your community look like? How do you fit in it or not fit in it? And if you feel you don't have a community, which a lot of people don't, then tell us what that ideal community would look like. Paint us a picture. The third speech is goals. Not just a list of goals, but also who's going to be part of that process in getting you there. And the fourth speech, which we actually only had 3 speeches for the very long time, one of our students recommended that we should do a 4th speech. And that should be, what did you get out of the program? And not just the program, but what did you learn from each other? What did you learn from yourself? Of course, he's looked at me and said, now I've got to do that speech, don't I? I said, yeah. But I'll tell you, people are natural speakers, which is really great. I mean, we've seen people that were like, wow, you know? And then others, we've watched them grow and grow and grow through the process. And they've come to events like this, and they've spoken, which is really fabulous. Valued role projects is really about, like it says here, it's individual or group projects. It's really about people sharing their talents, their skills, their knowledge, and by doing so, connecting with their community as they define it. Everybody has a different definition of that. For some people, their community they wanted to connect with, or reconnect with, was their families. So one woman said, you know what, I haven't cooked meals for my family in years. So her valued role was to cook a meal. That's a valued role. Other students said, you know what, I want to talk to people, especially young people, about my recovery, you know? Tell our story, like Bridgett's doing. So what we do is we arrange for them to speak to a group of young people and share their stories. Other people said, you know what, I want to get connected. I want to be able to actually give something, like, other than their own talents and skills. I didn't mean to make it sound that way. But give something physical, collect food donations, those types of things. Give to the Women's and Children's Shelter, and that's what they did. Other people, we have so many people, and I'm sure you guys know this, in the community, that have so many talents and skills. Music, art, you know, poets, writers. So we found different ways to help people be able to share that. You know, one guy, great pianist, oh my God, he graduated like 17 years ago, or 18 years ago. Anyways, self-taught, so he did it publicly. for a couple of nursing homes, and for the local social club. So there's different ways that people do their Value Roll projects. But again, it's really about connecting people, sharing talents and skills, you know, and acknowledging, self-acknowledgement that, you know what, I belong and I have something to offer. That's really what it's about. So moving forward, this project for the last, I don't know what, it's been 4 or 5 years, Michael, that we started doing the replications, which honestly surprised the heck out of me. You look surprised. I was surprised. It was a small little project for many years. So we've been replicating. We've been working with Connecticut Valley Hospital, which one of the places that honestly I thought could never happen because we always did it in the community. But guess what? It did work inpatient as well, and it does work inpatient as well. Whiting Forensic Hospital. I'm sorry? Oh, okay. It's residential inpatient psychiatric treatment hospital. But for Whiting Forensic is more for, it's the same, but it's more for people with charges. That it's more like a prison, quite frankly. And then Dutcher, which is under Whiting Forensic. Am I doing this right, Kathleen? One of our facilitators for the Whiting Forensic Project, actually. West Haven Mental Health, River Valley Services in Middletown, Pennsylvania Jails and Prisons, and we've gone internationally. Canada, Scotland, New Zealand, and Hong Kong. So, we're moving forward. Well, I want to introduce, okay, Billy, you want to introduce yourself? Or you want me to introduce you? All right, Billy Bromage. And talking about valued role projects, Mr. Billy has done a program along with Bridgett that is the next step for our students in valued roles as well. Here you go, Billy.
Thank you, Patty. We're honored to be associated with the Citizens Project that's been so successful for nearly 2 decades now. So I'm going to talk about some of the work that we do in sort of community settings, larger community settings like neighborhoods, and eventually talking about statewide kind of stuff that we're working on. So Bridgett and I work together. We are, I'm a social worker, but we primarily work as community organizers in this role. And so we started our work a long time ago by working with communities. So we started with, you'll see on the left there, working with a neighborhood that was doing cleanup. So we decided what we wanted to do is connect with a neighborhood, or a few neighborhoods in New Haven. This one was doing a lot of work already and was very sort of welcoming to people coming in and working with them. And we really wanted to be respectful about how we entered the community. We wanted to be sure that we entered the community in a way that the community wanted us to enter. So too often where we work at Yale University or large institutions enter neighborhoods based on our own definition of what that neighborhood might need or what we perceive that neighborhood might need. So we really wanted to enter with a sense of humility, with a sense of the neighborhood knows what it needs from us, and we are really coming in to help and be part of that, and exercise our citizenship by being part of the neighborhood as it defined it. So we started by doing neighborhood cleanups. At first, it was a little bit hard to understand how that might work with our citizenship work, you know, picking up garbage and that kind of thing around the neighborhood. But it certainly helped us to build the relationships within the neighborhood that were sort of vital to our work. And then we moved on to attending meetings. They have monthly meetings with the neighborhood associations. We'd attend those. And through that, developed relationships where we could build on and our work in the neighborhood. And Bridgett will talk a little bit more about some of that stuff as we move forward. Simultaneously with working with the neighborhoods, we were also developing a project called Project Connect out of the Connecticut Mental Health Center here in New Haven. So Project Connect is designed or based on the idea of Project Friendship, which is a project in Prince George, British Columbia, way up in Canada by the sort of border of Alaska, sort of an isolated place, a town of about 80,000 people. And what they developed was the idea that people that are often, like Phil was talking about, that might be marginalized by a mental illness or a physical disability, a traumatic brain injury, whatever it might be, really have a place in their community, and that their community would actually be stronger if everyone was included and everyone knew each other and was had some kind of valued role in their community. So we really loved what they were doing, and tried to sort of bring that kind of idea to New Haven. What we did with our project was, there's no referrals for it. There's no sort of technical way that it has to go through the mental health system. Really, somebody just has to see the flyer and give us a call. It's myself and a few peers that work on the project, including Bridgett, has worked with us over the years. And really, what we do when somebody comes into Project Connect is just ask you what you want to do. So it's not sort of the usual way that things are done to say, there's a menu of options and you can either go do this today or do that today. It's more of you decide what you want to do. So it can be anything that you want to do in the community, from getting involved in volunteering to joining a bike club to becoming part of an activist group, whatever it is that you want to do. We had a gentleman at one point that came in and wanted to do ham radio stuff with other people, and we were like, oh man, how are we going to make this happen? But luckily we found somebody that did that, did ham radio, and he was able to do that. But so really our job is to figure out what somebody wants to do, and then how do we support that. For some people, it's really like the anxiety of like, I don't want to take the bus and then walk in by myself into somewhere where I don't know anybody. So what we might do is support by being a partner in entering into the space together. Other times, it's really just finding resources. Somebody might not know about the things that are happening, so together we figure that out, and the person might go themselves to that. We recently did a little bit of research on Project Connect and found that, it started off fairly strong, and it's kind of sort of going along, but I would say there's challenges to it. And I think, as some people who work in mental health systems might have thought about, this is really a challenging thing to communicate in mental health settings. It seems fairly basic, but it can be really challenging in a setting to think about life outside of the center in a sort of organized way. We found that through some of the research we've done that, providers can be uncomfortable with the idea of sort of what happens out there in the world, and this sort of sense of we can't control that. There's a lot of risk out in the world, and risk is incredibly inherent in this kind of thing, that it just happens, that there is risk, and you have to be, and it's also hard to explain, right? It's not the usual thing, like I said, of here's the thing you could, here's something you can do, and we can really put it in a package. It's a little bit more undefined than that, so that can be difficult. And there's been recommendations from some of the people that work on the project, including peers, that this kind of thing might need to happen outside of a mental health center and be more of a community partnership. So I'm going to turn it over to Bridgett to talk about some of the sort of more group-based collective stuff that we've done that sort of solves for some of these problems of the individual. All right. Oh yeah, sorry.
In the mental health setting, and I know I didn't want to be behind there because, again, the control, when you go into that kind of setting, they got to hear what we're saying. If we say something wrong, I didn't want to be recommended. So we moved out of there, and we moved into, actually we started like with 6 people at the clubhouse, so they didn't want to stay there. We moved out of there, we went to probably like 5 or 6 coffee shops because the group started getting bigger. And what we noticed that as people was coming in, because I was telling people that was leaving the Citizen Project, hey, you want to come and, the next step, you want to come and join this group face. And what we started out doing was just to say hi to 10 people a day, right? So we was meeting just to say, when you go out, can you just say hi to 10 people? So I didn't find that kind of hard to do because I come from a down south background, and we always speak to people. I'll speak to a dog if I have to. So, I didn't care about saying good morning. But again, people are so busy. Like, they hustle and bustle trying to get the work on to get the kids, and people forget to hold the door for people. They forget to get up off the bus and let a senior sit down. So to me, FACE is about just being warm and kind to others. So we were just meeting about talking about being kind to others. Again, the coffee shop that we was in, it kept growing, and all of us, the majority of us, have mental health and substance abuse. But when we go to meet twice a week, every other week, we meet twice out the whole month, we don't talk about our mental health unless somebody's struggling. And I got people that don't have mental health to come into the group. So we never talk about our mental health, because that's just only a part of who we are. It's a whole Bridgett here. I just have a little infraction or life interruption with mental health, but that doesn't make me who I am. Yeah. Oh, well, I'm done. Focus starters. Okay, so I'm on the next part. What is it? Okay. Okay, so, oh my God, did we have a project trying to get our human respect, love, peace, hope, and belonging and dignity, and that speaks of the stuff that I was just talking about, of being kind to one another. So to get the words, to work in a group setting, right, it takes a long process, because you have so many different personalities at the table. And when we was making the words up, that probably took us 6 months to get the words, because one thing about this group, there's no leader. There's no one that can take over the group, because nothing get moved on until everybody's on board. It's a shared decision. Billy's in front of the mic now. I know that Billy's the guy to take the notes. We all know that Billy's the guy that got perch money to get us coffee and some a little breakfast. But at the end of the day, Billy don't make no decision without all of us. If everybody doesn't agree, we do not move on. So that process can be linear, but it's worth it. We have a lot of sidebar conversation like Nancy Grace, but we get the job done. Yeah. So this one here, I don't know where my slide is. Can you just most likely see this slide? So over here, we was at the Peace Festival. Pauline's in this picture. So we was at the Peace Festival with West River. Was that there? We was there?
It was a holiday party.
So we was at a holiday party. What we do also is go into other people's community, as Billy talked about. We go into this community, but we don't enter the community unless we ask to come in that community. Mm-hmm. I am so serious about entering excellent people communities, because, you know, some, I'm gonna put it out there, Yale has a bad tendency of going in people's communities, collecting data, making money off of poor people, and then leave and don't come back, and you do nothing with the people that you got the information for and the data that you went in there got. So it's important how we enter and exit, and we want to ask, can we come in there? So this is what we did. Ask, can we enter to your thing, whatever you're doing? Because a lot of communities will talk about all the disparities, all the bad things in the communities, but a lot of the communities got a lot of good things in the community too. So we want to lift them up and be a part of. So we do this thing, a holiday party with West River every year. We getting ready to do one in December, I think the 15th or 14th. We'll be there. We have done a lot of murals. We have done like 7 to 8 murals with them letters, them words up there. And what we ask the people in the festivals, what do one of them words mean to you? So we have children, families, moms, dads, you know, coming into the festivals, and they tell us what one of the words mean to them. Yeah. You're welcome, Bill. I'm sorry if I go off a little bit.
So I'm just going to mention really quick, we recently did interviews. Perch is a research organization as well. And we did some interviews with FACE members. And the way we did it was anyone that was involved in FACE. So it wasn't it was anybody who was involved. So people that are part of the mental health system, people that aren't, people that were work in the mental health system, anyone that's was a core member of FACE. We did 15 interviews. And these were some of the things that we came up with as sort of the main things that people saw as being the what FACE is. And I won't go over them all in the interest of time, but a couple things to highlight. One is that people really feel a sense of ownership, and like Bridgett was talking about as we tried to get our logo there with all the words on it, that I'll just read the quote because I think it's lovely. I'm along for the ride, but I don't know where we're going to go. It's kind of a real sort of a sense of this belongs to me, but because it belongs to everyone, we don't know where it's going to go. And people, somebody said they were comfortable with the mystery. So it's this idea of I'm going to join something, I don't know exactly what it is. And Bridgett also talked about being a good virus. That idea, one person used that as a quote, this idea of going out and saying hello to people, going out and building community, that you will spread it, and you won't always see where it's going, but you'll spread this sort of goodness around. And then the clearer self, that people felt often that they were less isolated, less sort of in a lot of domains in their life, both through the activity of the group, but also once you sort of were on your own out in your community, that you just felt a certain sense that the community was more yours and you were of that community. And I think this quote is great, and I'll just read it quickly, is I don't know if like intellectually I think about these things differently now, but on the human level I feel more connected and more implicated. And I think that implicated part speaks to responsibilities, one of the 5 R's, that I have a sense that I have to do something for my community, and I feel like I'm part of that. And then I'll just read this last idea of being challenged to take risks and having more faith in myself and feeling more belonging, which I think really speaks to the times we're in now, is everybody in that group has played a very meaningful role in my own personal growth. I mean, the group of very kind people, and we live in a world that can be pretty dark sometimes. And I think that doesn't just talk about mental health, that talks about the state of things right now. And I'm going to... So I just want to, Bridgett and I are going to wrap up here on this slide. So on the left-hand side, you'll see our group that we're part of called Witnesses to Hunger, and I'll explain that really quickly. That's a rally we did on the Green when they were getting ready to cut food stamps on the federal level, obviously, and we did a rally to respond. So the FACE group has been really involved in restarting a local chapter of Witnesses to Hunger, which is a group of people with lived experience, current experience often of food insecurity and not having enough money to make ends meet in food-wise. And they really were trying to restart in New Haven, and we were able to support that by adding a whole lot of members, a lot through Bridgett's recruiting, a lot of whom are Citizens Project students or graduates. And that group's been able to do a lot of activism, including rallies and meeting with our state, our sort of federal rep and senators, doing call-ins and all kinds of activism. So it was a way that we were able, not all FACE members are part of this, but a lot are, and it was this way to take sort of this more neighborhood level work that we do and move it into a more advocacy, more direct. And again, like Bridgett was saying, it doesn't have to do directly with mental health, so it's not direct mental health advocacy, but certainly having enough food every month is critical to mental wellness. So we got involved and have had a lot of success with that group. You're going to take it home.
In Branford, and I tell you, when we got to that retreat and on that water with that house, we was like shocked, like just myself. I'm like, my goodness, we out here for do a meeting. And I didn't want to do the meeting. I just want to soak up the sun and the water on the house. I am so honored that Perch and Billy let us go to the retreat, because it wasn't just me that never been on a house with water, but the retreat meant so much to all of us, because again, that picture right there, the people who's in that picture, I would have never built a relationship with them if I wasn't in the FACE group. Not only that, when we went out to the retreat, we went out there to get work done, which we did the second half of the day. But the first half, we all pitched in and cooked together and made a meal and sat down and break bread together. And Deidre Hawkins is right over there, and I appreciate you, because I remember her doing a training with me and Billy, and she spoke and said, about how breaking bread with people, and what I mean by that is having food is important. So I think it's important to bring food when you're sitting at the table. And I'm honored to be in this group. And I tell you, we've been there almost 4 to 5 years. I probably missed 3 times. I don't not go. And we'll be there next Friday. We would have been there today, but we had to come here. Next Friday, we'll be at Face, for sure. Yes.
So hello everyone, my name is this working? Is Annie Harper. And I'm afraid the work that I do is a little bit drier. I work on finances and mental health. So the work that I do, this is really about the resources are, right? But it's also clear, I don't need to explain to people here, that if you don't have the resources that you need to manage in your life, the other R's can all kind of fall by the wayside. So it's kind of drier work, but I think it's really crucial. Also, I came to this group later than everyone else. So the work that I do around finances and poverty is not as well developed. We don't have as good a sense of what's needed and what works. But there's no way that I could have been able to do what I do, and all of us understand the financial issues, had this not happened already over the past 19, 20 years. So really, the understanding each R requires understanding all of them and working collectively on all of them. So I just wanted to put that out there, that this work I do on finances, it sounds kind of separate and it's dry, but it's really rooted in everything that everyone's talked about so far. So what we've been trying to understand over the last 5 or 6 years since actually Michael brought me in, recognizing that, you know, there's a lot of work that's been done around all the 5 Rs and it's getting richer and more impactful, but that kind of money piece was left out. We knew that people, there are ways that we work with people on their money, but it wasn't really recovery oriented and it wasn't citizenship oriented, it wasn't kind of rooted in society. So that's what I've been trying to work on. So we know that from research and from lived experience that there is a really strong connection between financial health and mental health, right? Hang on a second. People with lower incomes and lower wealth are more likely to experience mental health problems. And when people do have mental health problems, for whatever reason, they're more likely to experience financial problems. And it's a vicious circle because regardless of where it started, recovery in mental health becomes much more difficult when you have financial challenges, right? And there's just a list of things here that I think aren't news to anyone, that if you have a mental health problem, you're likely not to have enough money, either because you struggle to find employment and you rely on benefits, or when you do find employment, wages are low and insecure. You probably lack access to financial services. By that I mean banking services, affordable credit. We know from nationwide surveys that people with disabilities, particularly people with psychiatric disabilities, are much more poorly served by banks than anyone else. We know that people with mental health problems are more likely to be burdened by debt that they cannot afford. And we also know that there's a very strong connection between feeling burdened by debt you can't afford and stress and mental health problems. So that's a vicious circle that people find themselves in. It may be because people don't have enough money, have had to borrow to make ends meet and get into trouble. It may be because somebody's symptoms have meant that they overspent or that they were taken advantage of. For whatever reason, debt is a big problem for people with mental illness. People are vulnerable to financial exploitation. You don't have to have a mental health problem to understand that when you get old, you may be more vulnerable to financial exploitation. And for people with mental health problems, this can happen at any point in their life. Sometimes, as I said, people may have symptoms that result in them making poor financial decisions, but also I think it's important to recognize that when you live in poverty, regardless of your official mental health diagnosis, you're likely to make poor financial decisions. We know that when you're stressed out about bills today, paying the rent tomorrow, it's really hard to think about next month, next year, let alone retirement, right? So this is a kind of vicious circle of financial difficulties, limiting mental capacity, going round in a circle, and if you already have like a mental health diagnosis, that just makes it worse. If you are relying on public benefits for your income, The asset limits related to that and the income earning limits mean, and I see people nodding, you're kind of forced into a situation where anytime you may be able to get ahead financially, you're kind of pushed back. So these are all the many reasons why I think there's a connection between mental health and financial health. And then given these situations, people struggle to meet their basic needs, their mental health may be worsened by that financial stress, and it's just a vicious circle. And this is just something that someone said in one of our focus groups around the connection between finances and mental health. I need to leave my house an hour early before I go anywhere. This is because lack of being able to afford transportation. I walk so much I have to sit for 3 hours after I get to the house because my feet are so tired. So this is just, I think, an illustration of how being poor makes life super stressful. So how do we currently respond? Oh, that's not supposed to happen. There we go. In the systems of care, because it's not news to anyone working in mental health that people with mental health problems also struggle with financial problems. And we do try to address it, right? We try and make sure that people are connected with the benefits to which they're entitled. We try to make sure they get access to whatever subsidies are out there. But I think most of us would acknowledge that even with all the benefits and subsidies to which you're entitled, you're still really going to be struggling financially. We also provide support to help people work and earn an income, which does work well for some, but I think research shows that most, even when people find employment, it tends to be low wage, and most people work part-time if they do work at all, so they remain reliant on disability benefits. This is not necessarily because people can't work. It's often just as much because the work system out there is not accommodating of people who have mental illness due to stigma and discrimination. But beyond helping people maximize the income they have, mostly when we find somebody in the mental health system of care who's struggling with their finances, our response is to remove financial control from them. You're incapable, you can't manage your money, you're not paying your rent, somebody needs to control your money for you. It's essential and effective for some people. So I'm not denying the utility of those options, but we do know that it can hinder people's recovery and their ability to be more independent over time with their finances and everything else. And also that it can cause stress and anxiety. Often if the person helping you with your money is someone with whom you have an important relationship, it can create tension in that relationship. So these are this is the reality of what happens with the kind of systems that we, the kind of help that we offer people now. A couple of quotes from people. Someone mentioned that the payee program is beneficial for someone that's going through a crisis, but if you get better and you start developing some symptoms again, it would be good to maybe just temporarily have someone that's watching out for you, right? So this is someone who had a payee in the past, had been able to come out of that system and was managing his own money, but he was always afraid that if something went wrong, there was no one there to help him, but there wasn't really a system in place to kind of be a halfway kind of help. And then as somebody said, with a conservator, you really don't know what's going on with your money. I don't want to sit and argue with someone about my own money. It's like getting an allowance from your parent. So again, people need help, but sometimes when financial control is removed entirely, it's extremely disempowering. And then finally, this is what I think we miss in current systems of care. We miss, which I've really hinted at, that the only help we offer is really for people who are struggling in a very extreme way by removing financial control for them. There's very little that we can offer for the many, many people who are struggling financially, but for whatever reason aren't determined incapable, which is what usually has to happen for you to get someone to manage your money for you. And then the other thing I think we don't address is the more systemic causes and barriers, the systemic causes of the financial difficulties people are having, whether that's the employment, opportunities for employment, the benefit system, access to financial services, consumer protections around debt, etc. Unless we address things at those two levels, I think we're not doing the work we need to do. So what does citizenship offer that makes this different? I think the first thing is recognizing that the causes of financial problems often lie beyond the individual. We tend to focus on, teaching someone how to budget or teaching them about banking, but actually so many of the problems are what we call upstream problems. There are causes upstream that are resulting in the symptoms we see in people's lives. And of course, we need systems of care to enable people to manage difficulties they're facing today, but we also need to be thinking about how can we stop this happening in the first place. What changes do we need in terms of like labor and housing markets, educational opportunities, recreational transportation infrastructure, benefits for people who can't work, financial services, access to healthcare? And taking it further back into root causes, what policies need to change to combat structural racism, discrimination against people with mental illness? This is something we have to think about. We can't just stop at programs that help people manage their money better. Now, people who are directly engaged in providing services don't need to add like making systemic change to their already massive workload, but I do think we need to find allies to work together to change, to bring in for systems changing work. And those of us with the privilege of time and resources to work on systems change need to ally with people who have lived experience, families, and people who are providing frontline care. So one of the ways in which we're trying to do that in citizenship is getting the banks to do things differently. I hear repeatedly from people about the struggles they've had with banks, and I hear repeatedly that the answer to that is to teach those people how to bank. I'm done with that because I think unless the banks change, people are going to continue to struggle. So we're really working locally in New Haven, statewide, and to some extent nationally to understand what the limitations are when it comes to providing people with mental health problems with good banking services, and then telling the banks, you need to do this differently. And so we just wrote a report that we're presenting next week, which will be bringing banks into the room with the Yale Law School and telling them, this is what the research shows, this is what you need to be doing differently. So please come if you can, next week, Wednesday, noon. This is the second way in which I think the citizen framework approaches financial health differently, is by recognizing like the complexity and changeability of human experience. We don't all fall, and this is regardless of your mental health status, we don't all fall into the bucket of I'm someone who doesn't need any help with my finances, and I'm someone who's incapable of managing my finances. Actually, I think very few people fall into those two extremes. Most of us, mental health problems or not, fall somewhere along this spectrum of needing help in some ways at different points in my life, more help at some times, less help at others, help with one thing at one time, help with another at another. And I think there's an awful lot we can do. There's huge potential to provide help for people, meeting them where they're at, and changing that over time as circumstances change. And one way, some research we've done has found that if you provide one-on-one financial counseling to people, it's not going to take their poverty away, it's not going to fix the banking system, but we did find that it can help people improve their financial situation and feel less stressed out about finances. One of the things we're trying to do now is understand the potential for mainstreaming financial counseling for people with mental illness. So financial counseling and advice is increasingly available for free in cities around the country. We've just a week ago opened a financial empowerment center that does that in New Haven. And we're really interested in learning how well can mainstream financial counseling accommodate any particular problems that people with mental illness can have, and how can we make mainstream financial counseling services work for everyone, whether or not they have mental health problems. And this was just a couple of things that people told us about wanting help with their finances, that giving you an allowance isn't teaching you anything. Get someone to counsel you, help you work with a budget. And another person said how because finances are such a sensitive topic and stressful, it can be such an anxiety-provoking experience to talk about money, it can help to talk about it with someone who's been there. And I think that I want to finish with that point, that one of the things we do in Perch really well is make sure that everything we do from the beginning and all the way to the end is informed by people with lived experience. Thank you.